It's Two on the Aisle with me, Charles Gross, and Leslie Hoban Blake. Tonight reviews of Puffs, Curvy Widow, Prince of Broadway, and Hal Prince's new book, Sense of Occasion. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Two on the Aisle. And good evening. I am the aforementioned Charles Gross.
And I am the aforementioned Leslie Hoban Blake, who happens to be the historian of the Drama Desk.
How do you like that?
Very historic tonight.
Do you?
Well, because ultimately we'll be talking about an historical person, basically, in the Broadway world.
Right. But first, we're going to talk about Puffs, or 7 increasingly eventful years at a certain school of magic and magic.
And no, it's not about who you think it's about. So,
but he does appear. Now,
Yes,
this is kind of a fan fiction play, and sort of a Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead situation. They can't say it's Hogwarts, but it obviously is, and it concentrates on students who we've never heard of in the Hufflepuff house who happen to be there at the same time that Harry, Hermione, and Ron, who do appear in the show, were there. And then we kind of see their backstage story, how the Hufflepuffs, who they're the nice guys, but they are rarely noted for anything else.
well,
So
they're the worst house.
No, they're the undistinguished house.
Okay.
Because there's the mean house, there's the smart house, there's the brave
You're
house.
right. Undistinguished is a good
and
phrase
if
for
you're a
that.
Harry Potter fan, you're filling in the blanks here. And if you're not a Harry Potter fan, why do you even care
Why
about
would you
this
even
show?
go?
Yeah.
Except that, earlier in the year, my niece came up to visit me for her birthday, and I sent her to the show. I bought a ticket for this show and sent her, and she had a great time. I had no desire to go. I'm sorry that I didn't, because it would have been great to see it again. It's a delightful show. It's in the same way that we were taken in by Prince of Lightning. What is his name?
Percy Jackson.
Percy Jackson. This, which is geared not to kids, not to little kids, but to fans, as Charlie said, but also to those who have seen the movies and want to have a kind of a let's get our mind off the real world for 90 minutes kind of evening. It's beautifully staged. You have my playbill, so I don't know by whom. I would like to say that the cast members are all terrific. One or two are more terrific than others, but that's because they've been given kind of numbers. Okay.
Matt Cox staged.
Directed by Kristen McCarthy Parker.
Matt Cox wrote it. I'm sorry.
Yes, Matt Cox wrote it, right. And it's the little show that could. It started in a theater about the size of this desk, and it has now moved to New World Stages, which is a home for orphan shows, and thank God for it. And there are more shows that should move there instead of moving to Broadway. Because then they sometimes really get killed on Broadway when they could have a nice run at something like New Stages.
Right.
So now I've said my piece.
Well, let's see. I think it was Zach Moon who plays the lead. He basically, let's see who.
I don't know.
Yes, he plays Wayne, who was born in Texas. He goes to Hogwarts. Yeah, that's him.
Yeah.
And basically,
We're never going to get a close-up of these guys.
Story.
It's a big cast.
The story, yeah, it's a good big cast. It's a good cast. You have, I think,
there are a couple of standouts. A guy named James
Fohey.
The way it's spelled, I don't want to pronounce it because I don't think that's his name.
Cedric.
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 And he reminded me all the way through of a young Tim Curry. And I'm not sure if he was trying to be a young Tim Curry.
I don't think so.
Well, he had this wonderful toothy grin,
and I will say,
he'd push out his head and say things in a certain voice. But he was just delightful.
And I did feel that the show got a little silly at times.
Well, duh.
Yeah. Well, but not necessarily,
Okay, but
in a good way. But all in all, it's a fun show.
Yeah.
And again, if you're a Harry Potter fan, you certainly will have more of an appreciation for it. It's like you can enjoy Forbidden Broadway, but if you've seen the shows, that it's
very
so.
much
If you know
reminded me of
Harry
Broadway,
Potter, as the movies, I think more so than the plays, but than the books rather. Although certainly
you're probably
knowing the books,
you know the
is
books
a
better
good
than I do.
idea. Will enhance your enjoyment. I'm going to give it 3.5.
I took Charlie's daughter Sarah.
Yes.
Charlie took his other daughter Miriam, and
yes.
so the girls both saw it. I think Sarah and I enjoyed it enormously. She knew everything, and they treated it a little bit like Rocky Horror. So when somebody says, "Well, you're getting serious," though, and it goes, "Oh, serious," And I didn't know all of them. I knew that one, but I don't know all of them. But I think it's going to come to a point where this show could travel to college circuits.
Oh, I
think it
think
has
so.
a life.
I
It might
think
even
so.
have a bigger life than the college circuits. It was a charm. It was just delightful, and I had a wonderful evening, and I'm very glad that I, overcame my original I don't want to see that, and did see it. So,
Yeah.
however, may I move on to this?
Well,
Because-
you're going to give it playbills?
Oh, sorry, I'm going to give it playbills. It's going to get. I would give it 4. I had a
Really?
I had a good time. It was well written. It was beautifully directed. It was lit very well. It had that wonderful feeling of everything is right here.
Well, I think you and Sarah enjoyed it more than
I think we
Miriam
did. I think we
and
did. I would not send my
and I
Aunt
did.
Tilly from Toledo,
No.
unless she knew Harry Potter.
well, I wouldn't send my Uncle Reuben
But
there
I can
either.
see tourists walking in on it and loving it.
And
I can see it having a
yeah.
life.
And I would not send my Uncle Reuben to this either.
No.
But I think I can recommend. This is Curvy Widow.
May I?
Now-
May I?
Oh,
May I
I'm
speak to
sorry.
it as the only curvy widow in the room? Although I'm not a
Okay.
widow, but I am the only femme in the room, female in the
Right,
room. Bobby Goldman, who's married to James Goldman, whose name is going to come up a little bit later. Bobby Goldman is now 68 years old. There was an article on her in the Times 2 weeks ago. This is based on her book, and she was a widow. She was married to James Goldman,
Still
who's the
is.
brother of William Goldman, who wrote Lion in Winter. James Goldman wrote Lion in Winter. And the reason I'm bringing this up is that she was married to somebody famous, you see. And that was her claim to fame, is that she was married to somebody famous. And as a result, at her dinner table every night were the names that of the period that you drop, the way people drop names. And then suddenly she was a widow. And she was not a traditional widow. She's a tiny little woman. She comes and does a talk back after the show. And this is her life as a widow and as a sexual being. And because she's 68 now, the play probably is it's
about 20 years ago.
20 years ago. So there was just the tip of the online dating scene, and there were ads that you could answer, kind of thing. And she had to write about herself and put herself out there, and that's where Curvy Widow came from. Somebody said, "Well, call yourself a Curvy Widow," but she's a little
she comes
bit
up
of a
with it.
thing. She comes up with it, but she's a tiny little thing, and she's a delight in person. The show is not. The show is so belabored. It stars Nancy Opel, whom I adore, and a couple of really nice-looking young guys who play all the men in her life, and somebody who plays her friend. You can help me out if you want to on that. And it tells the story of how, and she's a contractor, and this is true. She's a contractor. Now that's a fascinating piece. And the only thing is that she takes down the
Contractor as in
as
construction.
in construction.
In fact, I think she helped build the set in real life.
She not only did she help build the set, it's based on her downtown loft.
I think she took a lot of stuff out of the loft, apparently.
She put stuff.
But
for
the night I was there,
furniture.
we had to talk back.
Well, I think she does that all the time, and I think it's wonderful because if you don't stay for the talkback, you miss all the really good stuff. And she's a charmer. I can see why men liked her, and she was not particularly attractive.
Apparently
Forgive me
they
for
still
saying.
do, because on what night she had 2 boyfriends in the audience at the same
She
time.
goes-
And neither of them knew that the other was there.
Oh, yeah, but see, here's the thing that the Times said. She didn't say what the night we were there. She only goes with married men, which I know is not and she's now dating 6 different men.
Well,
So,
I think the appropriate way to describe this is to basically get out all of Joan Rivers' Heidi Abramowitz jokes. The woman is a slut. I mean, the Curvy Widow went to England. Oh, was she disappointed when she found out that Big Ben was a clock? I mean, this is sex and sex and sex
But
in
it
the
isn't-
city.
but the show
and
isn't-
who's she going to bang next? And it does, but that's what it ultimately becomes.
I know.
Originally, she's a widow. She's having trouble getting back into the dating scene. Apparently, she never cheated on her husband. For all we know, she doesn't say this one way or the other. She may have been a virgin when she married him. Yeah, all right.
I don't know where that comes in. She was not.
It
she was
doesn't.
not young when she
It doesn't.
married him.
Well,
mean, she
I
was-
don't know when. I don't know.
well,
They
she was
don't.
over. She was 23 or something. 24.
Again, and she gets back into it, and boy, does she get it back. And they do deal with, shall we say, feminine issues
Of all kinds.
Yes.
But here's the
on
thing.
that.
Here's the thing. As a woman of a certain age, myself,
Yes.
knowing the dating game as an older gal. Oh God, gal! I actually said that.
How many married men have you been out with?
I'm not saying because their wives might find out. Anyway, actually, the married men are nicer than the men who are on the prowl, and that's what she said, and I found that out myself. I didn't always know they were married, but it turned out that way. Okay, just that's a little hello. Anyway.
I think when Nancy, when you leave the show, we have your replacement.
No. Well, here's the thing. I could sing those songs. They're not great songs. forgive me for I mean, the music starts and also the scenes end abruptly. I mean, this is not well directed as far as I'm concerned. There's a lot of movement, a lot of things happen, but I didn't get the sense of it being a really top-notch level
But you
show.
do have a tour de force performance from
Right,
Nancy Opel,
absolutely.
who is, she's on stage,
Who can elevate any
90%
material. Right.
of the
Show, absolutely.
of the show.
And she dresses on stage. That's how they figured out. It's all clothes from Mrs. Goldman.
Yes.
It's all her wardrobe. So she
Right.
wears a black pantsuit and puts
she
different
she
tops
doesn't
on.
find romance, but she lives hornily ever after.
Oh, that's very nice. I like that. That's where we should end on that, I think.
Oh,
What would you
really?
give it? What would you
Okay.
give it?
Well, do we also mention Drew Brody, who did the music and lyrics?
I already did.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I said I didn't think they were very good.
Okay.
I
Well, you didn't
thought-
mention him by name.
I thought better. Well, see, when you say something negative, then you don't mention the name. That's how I go. I think that's the way to do it.
Well, no such thing as bad publicity, as long as they spell the name right.
Well,
And
okay.
Fortunately, we don't have to spell on the air.
But what would you give it?
I enjoyed it. I think Nancy Opel had a lot to do with
She
it.
did.
Certainly not what I didn't know what to expect. And it's, again, you don't want to bring the younger children, and you don't want to bring Uncle Reuben, but
I doubt that they would go to a show called Curvy Widow. in the
I
first
would
place.
give it I'd say 3.5 Play-Dohs.
Again, I would give her 5
Okay.
for coming out and doing the tour de force, talking and whatnot, and perhaps for having lived the life. I wish
Right.
she'd talk more about him. I wish I knew more about their relationship because they didn't look right together.
Well, apparently she did manage his affairs a lot. Just
Yes,
in
yes.
addition to running
But
her
they were
construction
together 23
business,
years. I mean, this
she
was not
she helped him quite a
yeah.
bit with his.
I know, but it was a marriage, and they seemed
Which
to be in love.
is kind of
together.
how she managed to get the book. It opened doors for
But
her.
my number is I would give her. What did I say?
5.
4?
You said 5.
I said 5 for
You
okay.
said
She's
5.
really good. And I would give Nancy
1 for
4.
each curve.
Yes. And I don't know where the 5th one is, but I'm not even.
Right.
Oh, I guess. All right, never mind. And I would give Nancy 4, but I would give the show 2.
Okay.
I just
So
at least
this is
mention it.
kind of our Prince segment,
Hello.
which
we
will
are.
start with the Prince of Broadway, then segue into Sense of Occasion. Now, it is not unheard of to have a retrospective on Broadway.
No.
Jerome Robbins had Jerome Robbins Broadway.
Sondheim.
We had a
Several
Sondheim.
Sondheims side by side,
Yes.
and the other one as well. Yes.
And of course, Bob Fosse, which
Fosse,
combined.
of course.
But this is a little different in that it is the work of a producer-director.
Yeah.
And whereas when you do a composer, you're singing the song, you obviously,
Right.
when you do a choreographer and you're doing his dances, you know what he did.
Right.
When you're doing a director and you're only showing a sliver, you don't necessarily, you can't really understand the
How
in
you
many
choose.
cases how
What's the-
how you
what
choose,
was the
but-
process?
or what his contribution was, or especially with a producer.
Right.
We have a wonderful scene in this roof from Fiddler, which Prince produced. And
And
so
did
what do
not
you do?
direct.
Did not.
did not
Jerome Robbins
direct,
directed it. How do you show his contribution? Do you bring out the ledger?
Yeah.
Or you just let the work speak for itself, which is a lot of what is done. Now, Prince has had an amazing amount of work over the years, and in fact, some of
he's
it.
had an equal number of flops to his number
Right.
of hits. And that, I think, is what is missing in this. I know he talks about a couple of them. I know he even shows Superman. Which,
Well,
and we
no,
don't need to-
there's a song from Superman.
Oh, yeah, we don't need to. And
This
it's
is-
a
it's a
great
bird,
song.
it's a plane, it's Superman,
It's a-
yes.
But the song that they puts into it is "You Got Possibilities." Is a great
Oh,
song.
wonderful, and beautifully staged.
Absolutely.
By
And beautifully staged, and that's the problem.
Mm-hmm.
This is such a hit or miss kind of thing. I mean, there's no point. There's no other than sequentially, other than by year, chronologically. There's no storyline. Everybody comes out wearing. This is not an homage to Harold Prince. My wearing my glasses on my head. It's an homage to my father.
actually, it's not even done in sequence.
Oh, okay. I thought it was.
Nope.
Okay.
They have Sweeney Todd after
You're
Merrily
right,
Parade
you're right,
and
you're
Spider
right.
Woman.
Okay, you're right. Maybe that's where it fit better. But so that's what they did. They put the songs in, but they did begin as a sequential. In the beginning, this is what we
In
did.
the beginning,
Right. And the point that I was going to make was only that there are a couple of things here. First of all, I don't know that Prince is the best person to choose what's the best of Prince, because
well, Susan Stroman co-directed this
yes,
with him,
she
so
did, but
she was.
I don't know how much she had to do with the choosing of the material. Because even within the shows that we saw, I was very disappointed in the musical numbers that were chosen very often. In the She Loves Me, I know Ice Cream is maybe overdone, but boy, that's the number I want to hear. And they had a voice or two in there that could have
Oh,
done that,
yes.
And I was going to say, so everybody comes out as they just wear Prince glasses on their
Right.
heads. I said, this is not an homage to him, it's an homage to my father. But
Okay.
but while that
Your father wore his glasses on
on his head always. And my father looked like Harold Prince.
Okay.
He looked just like this on the cover. That's what my father looked like. So yes, all right.
All
Well,
right.
But I always do it because that way, if I need them, they're there. you know?
Okay.
And they
That's
act as a
probably
hairband.
why he does it.
And they act as a hairband. Well, he does it also because it hides part of the fact that he's bald.
Okay.
That's what my father did. Anyway, getting back to the show.
Yes.
So that was the only sense of continuity that there was aside from the fact that he directed.
And they really don't do much of it. Now, I guess if they were going to talk more about his process,
Yeah.
they might have had to cut a couple of numbers out, and I guess the assumption is people would rather see the songs than hear somebody talking about them. And there is some logic to that.
Absolutely.
But I would have liked to have gotten a little more from the show itself about, well, how did he come to that? How did he get
There were
to
anecdotes.
get
There
to
were a
this
few
number?
anecdotes about what it was like to work with David Merrick and
Right.
that kind of thing, which you
But
couldn't
not-
possibly
not
do
t-
without. But not much. Not enough.
Not much.
Not
And
enough.
in Showboat, for example, they staged 2 very nice numbers from Showboat.
Didn't need to.
But the problem is, and why they changed the lyrics to Old Man River, they didn't use the original ones, I don't
It's
understand.
PC. We're updating it so that certain words are not used. I'm sorry, Charlie. That's the way of the world. We're gonna
But
take down the
they took
Columbus
out the
statue.
lyric, I'm tired of living and scared of dying. I don't know how that's un-PC.
That's not. But
I mean, in his book,
yes,
I think he takes issue with the fact that in Zorba, a revival, they changed the song from "Life is what you do while you're waiting to die" till "Life is what you do till the moment that you die."
yes.
So
And Zorba was not featured in the
No,
show.
Zorba was
now,
not
here's
featured
what
in
was
the
not
show.
featured. Okay,
Yes.
Baker Street. I would have loved to see. I found in my collection of stuff I never should really have. Ray Jessel once did a show of his songs. Ray Jessel wrote Baker Street. Baker Street was an enormous flop, as I understand.
it
But
was.
I never got to see it.
and so was Merrily We Roll Along, which
I did get to
is
see.
represented here. And done. They took a song out of one of the major numbers and they maneuvered it in a whole new way with let's see, Emily Skinner.
Oh, we should
who,
talk about the cast, because
we
the
should.
cast is
Emily Skinner, I
phenomenal.
barely recognize because I think she's slimmed down quite a bit, and I guess she must be wearing heels because she looks taller.
I don't
and-
think she slimmed down. She was always slim inside, so she was very slim.
Right, but in subsequently in
Perhaps.
subsequent shows, she
Perhaps.
was a little, shall we say, curvier
Okay. But
on that.
here's
And ironically, I just saw Alice Ripley a couple of weeks ago.
Yes, who is? All right, so we have Chuck Cooper, and we have Emily Skinner, and we have Brandon Uranowitz, and Tony Yazbek, and Karen Ziemba, and then we have some lovely other kids.
Some of whom are Prince veterans.
Yes,
you know.
and then Janet DeCal and Briona Parham, sorry, and Michael Xavier. And I think that's
Right.
about it. And everybody doubles and triples and does things. Okay,
Right.
you mentioned
And it's-
Merrily We Roll Along.
Yes.
Where was Old Friend? My favorite song from if they're going to play a musical thing about Merrily We Roll Along, Hey Old Friend is those are the notes that make me know, oh my God. it's
Again, you know
Merrily.
what? Everybody who
Has
sees
a-
this
has a-
show
has his own
has their
favorite.
favorites.
I know.
I would have liked to have seen more of Pajama Game. They basically play a few bars off
Yes, there's
stage.
nothing. There's
I would have liked to have seen
Okay.
Candide, which Prince has
Yes.
revisited more than any other
Yes, and I would
musical,
have liked to have seen
you know.
Flora the Red Menace, which I don't know anything about.
But it's a decent selection. What I miss here is again the process. Like I was told, I got sidetracked with Showboat, but the big deal about Prince's Showboat was this hurricane that he and Stroman staged,
Right.
showing the passing years.
Right.
And I'm sure it was just too much to do for this production.
Oh.
But otherwise, basically, what we saw could have come from any production of Showboat.
Right.
And we really
On the road with it.
can't see print. You know.
Now, again.
Also, he does Phantom, which is obviously still playing. It's 30 years this January. I have not seen it since it opened. I hope to see it again. But God, sitting through the number that they did in this production, I hope it flows better in the actual production because I felt like I was sitting for 30 years. Boy, did that go on long.
And the only song I went out whistling was, or thinking about, and the next day humming, was from Follies. Not one of the major numbers from Follies. It was The Right Girl was the number.
Right. Yeah.
And, but see, Follies is done. It's such a big show. It's the ghost of the Ziegfeld Follies.
Right.
And so when you have one girl come out and walk down, and I thought, well, that's how I would stage it in summer stock. That's exactly what I would do, you know. And it's sad. And I don't know. I mean, obviously he wanted to do this just the way he wanted to write this book. It's a legacy.
Yes.
And because the other shows were not. Fosse didn't do Fosse.
Yes, he did.
No, Fosse was not
that's right.
alive when
That's
Fosse
right.
was
So,
done.
Anne Rinkin, I think, and Gwen Verdon.
Yes, but it's a legacy.
But Robbins did Jerome Robbins
yes,
Broadway.
Robbins did Jerome Robbins. But you know, and Sondheim was alive when Sondheim was done, but
Yes.
he didn't do it. He gave permission
Well, he also appeared in it on videotape.
on videotape. But
Right.
but this guy directed the show with Susan Stroman.
Yes.
So this is what he wants us to see.
Yes.
So he can't blame anybody else, you know.
Right?
And then, if we want to, I'm ready to give points, you know, where points are due.
Okay.
Which is to say, I would give it. It was like a really good drama school audition piece.
Ooh.
In the sense that everybody got big numbers to do. Chuck Cooper came out and did a fantastic Tevye. You know, we would never be cast as Tevye, so it was great to see. him
Maybe
do it.
he would in this
Maybe-
day and
maybe.
age. He also did Old Man River.
Which
Now, what would have happened if they had a white actor doing Old Man River? They've got a black
Frank
Tevye.
Sinatra sings Old Man
Okay,
River in
well,
some
there-
1940s
there you
musical,
go.
So, if you can believe that. And
No,
it's
but
true.
all right.
In a white tuxedo, he sings it. I have
Okay.
that emblazoned in my memory.
Well, I guess it's been done, so they didn't
It's
need to
been
do
done
it the
here.
original one.
No, we didn't see it here. He didn't
That's
do
true.
anything here. Why? That was Chuck Cooper could have done the hell out of one of those songs.
You know what?
I know.
There
I
was,
know.
everybody is going to come
I know.
and say, oh, I wanted to see this.
But that being
But there
said-
is no way you can include everything
no,
he's done.
Okay, and
Over
that
50
being
years.
said, you know, you want to see what everything he did. Read the book. It's all in the book.
Well, it's basically, this gives you, normally I think a play should stand on its own, but I think this is a
is the
wonderful
background.
companion because you'll
Absolutely.
understand what he was thinking, what he felt about with this book. This is basically a book that he wrote, Contradictions, in 1974.
This is a companion
and the
piece to
first
that.
half, well, the first half of this book is that book plus his reflections 40 years later. Then the second half is, well, here's what I've done since I wrote it.
yeah, absolutely.
There are a couple of things that I find very interesting. For example, and certain mistakes that he admits he made. She Loves Me was the first show that he directed on Broadway. And if he had waited 6 months,
Yeah.
he could have had Julie Andrews. And he says, you know what, with all respect to, due respect to Barbara Cook, I should have waited. Hal, you're right, you should have waited. And then he wonders about the show. He says, you know, I may be biased because it was my first. Hal, my opinion, it's one of the best shows that you ever did. I mean, I didn't see your production because I was 3 years old, but I've seen the Roundabout productions.
I love it when
and
you're talking to Hal.
and She Loves Me is a marvelous show. I never have understood why it hasn't gone further.
That's a personal thing. Now, I mentioned that I
Now,
was
that's a
going to say
professional
something
thing.
about Curvy. James Goldman was the co-writer with
Right.
his brother on Follies. So, you know, this is one of those things where you can go around and around and the name
It's a
dropping in the
long
book.
curve.
It's a long curve. There are only a couple of photos. I would have wanted 25% more photos.
I would have liked at least that much, but I found it to be a very informative, very
I love the
interesting book.
I love the book.
You know, I
didn't
could
love the
give that
play.
5 playbills. I was surprisingly, I kept hearing about it and I was thinking, oh, it's got to be amazing, but it wasn't. And part of what he writes in the book is that I'd rather do a show with low expectations, because if you do a show with high expectations, and everybody had to be having high expectations of this show, and inevitably it's
But it's not
let
inevitably
down.
because
Well, that's true.
the Sondheim show was brilliant, and it was done on cubes, and it didn't have to have 40. You didn't
I think it was
rebuild
better
the
done than
sets.
this, but I was.
But you know what? But you didn't have to try.
Jerome
to rebuild
Robbins, I think, was the epitome.
Yes, I agree with you. But you didn't have to try to rebuild the sets. He took more time rebuilding the sets. If he just had people come out to do the numbers, he could have done twice as
Well.
many numbers. Yeah, that's just okay. So what did you give it as a? I give the book
again.
I give the book
I give
4.
the book 5, and I give the show 3.5.
I give the book 4.5, and I give the show 3.5. And I give it because he cast it very well. I think he put some brilliant
did.
And I want to talk about this play,
Talk about all right, fine.
which deserves to have something to be said about it, but you didn't get to see it. The Suitcase Under the Bed is a collection of short plays by Teresa Deevy, who's been discovered by Jonathan Bank, the director of the Mint Theater Company. And I'll just very briefly, you won't know any of them, so I'm not going to even talk about them, but it's 4 plays. They each of them is about a half an hour long. They're about loneliness and lost love, and Teresa Deevy was a very fascinating woman. She was deaf, so she never heard her work. She saw it, but she never heard it. And she wrote for the radio, so she
Kinda like
really
Beethoven.
never heard it.
Like Beethoven.
Yes, like Beethoven. It's very. I never thought of it that way. And so it's just beautifully cast, beautifully directed. Jonathan, who's been a guest of ours, is a particular just a genius at finding these old pieces. And I just hope if you get a chance to see something before the end of the run, which is almost immediately, try to get one of his books, and you'll see a lot about this writer, and perhaps about the Mint Theater, which is I mean, I would give this 4 point.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, it was brilliantly
Okay.
done. And I mean, they just get better and better and better. So I'm a little biased, I know.
Well, this is a gold bint. When you go to the theater, look for Leslie and me, us too.
On the aisle.
He found himself at the gates of a certain school of female magic and male magic, where he would spend the next 7 years. Tonight, we'll be taking an incredibly in-depth look at those 7 years, over the next 5 hours split into 2 parts. What? 90-ish minutes! Oh.
Us have come in last place in the House Cup for ever. Together, we're going to change that. This year, we're going to win. Oh, we're going to get second. Oh, we're going to get third!
Stupefy!
What happened?
Oh, I think we stunned each other.
You mean we did the spell right?
Yay!
I want you to hurt them, torture them, kill them maybe. Prove to me that you are my daughter.
We are not a threat. Please be our friend.
Wait, wrong! I just had a thought. Hermione! Yes, I know that wrong, but she doesn't know about the troll and we have to go save her.
Curvy Widow's licking her lips. She's shaking her hips. Look out, all you men across the World Wide Web. Curvy Widow's got you in her sights. I've got to whittle it down, whittle it down, whittle it down. There's got to be a systematic way in which to narrow down the queue of men. I've got to whittle it down, whittle it down, whittle it down. Just a little task to project manage, organize and sort and cull the steady stream of horny men. Curvy Widows